Hello and welcome back to my little sanctuary here in the park. We live just over there in a flat just over there. But I was very tempted this morning to make this recording in the study at home. There's been snow arrive in the UK at this moment in time, and it's very cold. This morning was wet, sleety. In fact, this morning we went to visit one of our core members and we absolutely got soaked. And I was quite tempted to do this recording in the comfort and the warmth of a study. But I want to be reminded that this psalm is not about comfort and warmth. It's about the provision in the midst of all the challenges that surround us. Even in the cold, even in the wet, even when circumstances are difficult, this psalm has something to say to us. It's a beautiful piece of poetry. So we started off saying, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." This idea that I have something that I will never be bereft, whatever the circumstances may be. I shall not be wanting to feel the security of a God who is with me. And being a sheep, the rest of the psalm actually expands, as Hebrew poetry often does, on that first verse. So what does it mean, I shall not want? We went into week 2 and we talked about the fact that I lie down in green pastures. Now a sheep only lies down when it feels secure and safe. And secondly, in a desert land, there weren't green pastures as sometimes we take for granted here in the UK. There were tufts of grass, some that would only spring up in the dew of a morning, but the shepherds would know where they are. And sometimes it would be just sufficient for one meal, enough for the day. And it would be springs, often when not around, you just couldn't find a little river somewhere, and so that there would be places where the shepherds would know that there would be still water, where the sheep could drink without fearing the danger. Reminded me of the story in Exodus where God provided the Israelites in their Exodus with manna and quail, and their responsibility and God's provision was for each day. So what about the paths of righteousness? That's what we're thinking of today. In fact, there's 2 pictures in this paths of righteousness. There is a further expansion of the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me in the paths of righteousness. First of all, paths. In the desert lands, it wasn't a nice, easy, rocky place. Now here in the UK, I remember when I was a bit younger and a bit fitter, I would go hiking sometimes in an area called the Lake District. It wasn't too far from home. And in order sometimes to get to the good climb, you would have to go through the hard climb. And the hard climb was not necessarily the big rocks. It was the stuff that used to give way under your feet, the scree at the bottom of the mountain before you even got to the basis of the mountain. It would be stuff that when you stepped on it, it gave way and you would slip and you would fall. And many hikers who've walked across that twist their ankles or hurt themselves because the ground just gives way under them. Well, that was the kind of land that they were living in Judea. But when you see the pictures, what you see on the sides of the mountains so many paths that were made by years and years, traditions and traditions of moving along the sides of the mountain, where the sheep over all those years had provided safe ground that didn't go away from under their feet. And if the sheep would stray from those pathways, then the ground under them would would just give way, and they could fall, and they could tumble down the side of the mountain, and they could tumble down into a place that was much more dangerous. And so you get along the sides of the mountains in Judea all these myriads of paths, and the shepherds would lead them in these paths, safe ground. But it would be the safe ground that had come through years of tradition, of working and of leading and guiding. You see, here we get another story that comes out of Hebrew culture. You see, the idea that many of us have is that the future is what we should be looking at. And the future is ahead of us and the past is behind us. And if you remember, too often we misquote Philippians chapter 3. Put the past behind us and we move on. Well, that's a view that comes in essence from a 21st century perspective, because the Hebrews had a very different view. If you read the Old Testament, you will find the Hebrews talking about the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, of Noah. They would describe again and again that their future was dependent on them being able to hold on to that which God had been and had shown himself to be. So if that's ahead, and that's the place I don't know, actually in Jewish culture, they would turn the other way. And they would say, in looking at the God, I forget what is unknown to me. I forget the things that would challenge me, and I know my God is sufficient. The God of Abraham, the God of Jacob, the God of Esau, the God of Noah, the God of Moses, all those things that God had shown himself, the Hebrews would look at, and it would be in that certainty, that surety, that then they would cope with whatever lay behind them. If we're not careful, we see things quite differently in the 21st century. We make the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the God of Jonah, the God of Elijah, God of Jeremiah and Isaiah. All those lessons we put behind us, and we face the future. And too often we face the future with uncertainty because we forget that actually that is our certainty. And what is behind me, the uncertainty that is behind me, the things I have yet to do, the places I have yet to go, become certain because of the God of Jacob, Esau, Isaac. Because of the God who was there in the midst of the Exodus. The God who was there in the midst when the Israelites were taken away. The God who held them. In remembering that, whatever was still to come, that was behind them, became a little bit more certain. And we get to that point, that pinnacle at the end of the psalmist, which we will look at in a few weeks' time, when it says surely, that word surely. Now, if I'm going to face life with that absolute certainty of surely, I've got to be able to see not the uncertainty of what is yet to come, but the certainty of what God has already done. The God who is, the God who has, the God who will do, because I have seen what he has done. So they are paths of righteousness, laid down before the sheep ever start walking along them. They are the results of the traditions, the pathways, the thousands of times the sheep have passed along those pathways. And because of what those years and those traditions have done, that is secure pathways. That is secure ground. And when they move off that secure ground, they become prone to dangerous things. So what is your secure ground? Because sometimes we get so easily distracted. Distracted looking at what is unknown and forgetting what is known. looking to what is fearful in front of us without acknowledging and taking hold and remembering everything that God has already given to us. A few months ago, Regent Hall, I used an illustration, and it was in walking from our flat to the hall in Oxford Circus. I was walking through another local park, and it was autumn, and it was a bit blowy. The wind was coming down. It wasn't terrible, but it was enough that the leaves were coming off the trees. And I was walking along the path, and the crows were having a great time. They were sort of leaping off the ground and opening their wings, and for a little while just gliding as the wind just took them and then coming down. And then I noticed one crow, and it wasn't joining in with all his mates. No, what it was doing was it was jumping around frantically on the ground. And then I noticed what had happened was that the brittleness of a leaf, it had stepped on a leaf, and in its brittleness, its claws had gone through, and it was now on the bottom of the crow's foot. And the crow was desperate to get rid of this leaf. Absolutely desperate, trying everything to get rid of this leaf. It was unable to enjoy anything his mates were doing, the other crows. He wasn't able to fly. It had not restricted anything of his flying abilities. And yet, in that moment, he was totally distracted from who he was by the leaf on his foot. And if we're not careful, we get so easily distracted by what we face, by what life brings to us. We stand on a leaf, and the leaf gets stuck to us. And we spend so much energy trying to get rid of it that we forget to fly. We don't take hold of the opportunities. We don't realize the challenges that we can just take hold of rather than be fearful of. Why? Because I look back and I walk on the paths where the saints have trod. I remember as I was growing up, there have been those saints in my life who have given me the examples of what it means to be a salvationist in the world, as a Christian in the world. Sometimes in very practical ways, sometimes in those conversations that change the way you view things. I remember as I was growing up, we lived about 12 miles away from our home corps. And so it was quite a journey back and forward. And it was a very small corps. And my brother and I were the only young people in the corps at that time. And we started to learn to play some brass instruments. And there was a gentleman who worked in the shipyards in Middlesbrough. And what he would do on a weekly basis when his shifts allowed was, from Middlesbrough 12 miles away, he would put on his bicycle clips that kept his trousers out of his bike chain, and he would bike the 12 miles all the way to come to us, and he would spend time with two young boys teaching us music. But more than that, he taught us how to read the words of the music. He taught us the songs. He taught us the poetry. We learned to read the music and read the words at the same time. And then he would have a cup of tea. He would put his bicycle clips back on again, and he would bike after a full day's work the 12 miles back to his home. And he did that on a very regular basis for a long time for two young boys who were learning. And we saw in Jim, we began to see something of somebody who had trod a path of righteousness for us. He would talk so easily of what faith meant to him and what the songs meant to him. He would talk so much about what listening to God in his world would mean to him. He taught me how to look for paths of righteousness in an uncertain world, where if I step too far away, uncertain ground makes it difficult. Maybe not impossible, but certainly difficult. The ground just shifts underneath me. The rubble moves, the screen moves, and if I'm not careful, I fall. But on the paths of righteousness, in the places where the saints have trod, the saints I've known, the saints I've heard of, the saints I read of in Scripture, those are the paths of righteousness. And if I remember them and hold on to them, and He leads me towards remembering again and again in the depths of my being that He has not left me, He can do what He has always been able to do. My name is written in the palm of His hand, and He has done it, and He will always do it. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Lord, teach me to see the paths that have been trod before me and for me, that I may walk safely in a world that is uncertain. So don't be distracted. Keep hold of those things that God has reminded you of. Be part of your church fellowship, for there you will see other saints. You will share in conversations. You will see the paths that they have taken, so that I too may walk those paths. And they will point me to all the saints that have been, to the prophets. They will point me to the God of Elijah, Jacob, and remind me again and again that in those paths is my safety. And He leads me through those paths. Tragedy is when I get diverted by a leaf on my foot. Really? The Lord is my shepherd. Therefore I shall not want. May God bless you.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. Your rod and Your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen.